Good morning, everyone. I'm assuming you can all hear me. David Goldstein. I am the president of Mekko Graphics, and we've got a short webinar this morning focusing on your questions. So I'm going to get started. I've got a few questions that we've culled from our emails to us and phone calls to us and chats and all the other ways that people come to us with questions, and I will share those, and then I will save some time to answer some of your own questions. And you are welcome to place the questions in the little questions area in the GoToWebinar. You are also welcome at the end to unmute yourself, or I can unmute you, and you can ask me questions directly. So that's the plan, and we've got one of my colleagues is on the call to answer some simple one-off questions during the webinar as well. So again, David Goldstein from Mekko Graphics. I am going to work you through some questions that we've seen, and then throw it open for you, and we'll be done in half an hour. I will stick around a little after that if there's still questions to answer. So the first thing I want to talk a little bit about is making charts from data that you've captured in Excel. So one of the things that people often ask me about is how to work with data that I've got in Excel, that maybe I do a download, or I take it from a website. And here's some data that I got from on over budget projects around the world. So here you can see that I've got a list of projects, 20 some projects. I've got the data that I got from the web had the original budget, the final cost, the start date, the deadline, and the end date. So I copy and pasted this data here, and then I added some Excel formulas: percent over budget, which you can see showing up here in my chart, years late, which is just the end date minus the deadline year, and dollars over budget, which is just the original budget, the final cost minus the original budget. So more data than I need for this chart here, but really the sort of the bones of this chart. So I can basically just highlight this whole data range and then create the chart in PowerPoint based on the data range, or in Excel based on the data range. And this chart would just be a horizontal stacked bar chart like this one. So if I did that, I'd end up, if I did the chart in PowerPoint, I would end up with a chart that had that I need to do a few things to get it to look just like this one. One is I would need to use the switch bar series button, which is right up here, because the data for the bars are not in the columns, they're in the rows. So switch bars and series treats the rows as if they were bars, and the columns as if they were the series that go across the bars. So you need to press switch bar series, and then you also need to go into bars and series and tell Mekko Graphics which of these columns in my data sheet. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns in my data sheet. Which of those do I want to show as bars, which are just original budget and the dollars over budget? Which I want to show as data rows, which are percent over budget and years late, and which I want to ignore: final cost, start date, deadline, and end date. So with that, you can see that if I use original budget and over budget, then my total cost is going to be the total cost of the project, original budget plus the amount over budget. And then you can see I've got my two data columns here, percent over budget and years late. So very easy to make a chart. Start with the data that you're getting from the web and turn it into a chart very very quickly. So that's the first thing I wanted to show you, sort of starting with data. Maybe it's messy, bringing it all in and then playing around with it. I mean, maybe I didn't uh, know exactly what I wanted to have in my chart and in my data columns when I made the chart, but bringing all this data into PowerPoint and starting to play with it, I could get a sense of how I can make this chart look look the way I wanted it to look. One other slight little tricky thing here is I added this label here for the total cost. And basically this is just a y-axis label that I created, and it should be sitting over here at the y-axis, but then I just moved it to sit over here and align with my data columns. So that's just another way to sort of get an extra label into the chart, and I needed it for this chart. So that was my first question and the first answer to that first question. Second question is something that's relative that we get a lot, and it has to do with making a line chart and having a lot of data points in the line chart, and then having your x-axis labels be all on top of each other. So if you look at this chart, the data for this chart, again, I did switch bars and series, but I've got data for each day for the past year for Apple's closing price and Microsoft's closing price. And each of these labels here is just another date. So, but I don't want to show all of these, I just want to show some of them. So the way to show only some labels on the y-axis, on the x-axis, I apologize, is to go into bars and series. This is one of these little features that are slightly hard to find in Mekko graphics, and we're working on making them a little easier to find. And I hope they will be easier to find in an upcoming version of our software. So you've got to go into Format Bars and Series in the Format section of the ribbon, and then go to the Bars tab, and then you see here Show Every Nth Label. So I think for me, every 25th label, and then hit Enter, and now you'll see only every 25th label here. And if I wanted to get rid of all of those extra tick marks, I would just go here to Axes in the Format section of the ribbon. And under X-axis, there's this tick mark section, and I can say Show with Labels Only. And now I only have tick marks for my labels. If I wanted no tick marks, I would just say Hide All. So definitely you don't want to show all, you either want to show with labels only or hide all as the default, as the setting in a chart like this. So again, bars and series, bars, show every nth label. And then format axis, x-axis, tick marks, show with labels only. So 2 tips, hopefully useful. Third one I wanted to show you again was having to do with simplifying your chart. And here I've got a lot of data. So I went to the web and I found the 500 most Instagrammed locations, tourist attractions. So it's just going to pop up in a second. It takes a little while because there's a lot of data here. And you'll see it here. So I've got 500 locations alphabetically from the Alberg Zoo down to Zuckerberg, which probably someone knows where it is, but I don't, but it's definitely in Europe. And then I organized them into 3 columns, Europe, North America, and rest of world. And now I don't want to show my 500 or 470 items in this chart because that's too much, but I do want to show those. I do want to show the totals for North America, for Europe, and for rest of world. So I do that. I did a couple of things to simplify this chart. the first thing I did was change the way my data are shown. You see the data here are actual number of Instagram posts, maybe in thousands, and I wanted to show it in millions. So I would go to Format Chart, the Numbers tab, and I use the data scaling command here to divide my values by 10 to the 6th power. So change thousands to millions. And now you can see Disneyland is 14.6. And then I can just select one each of these labels, right click, go to the number, and add the units millions to the as a suffix to my segment values and my bar totals. So the next thing I did was create this other series. Very easy to create another series. Just go to bars and series, options, and then you can either add a new one called other, or if you've got a row already called other, you can add to that other, and then you can say anything with values less than 1 million, since I divided by 10 to the 6th, update, and it's going to add all of those to my other series. And if I want to include or exclude any specific items, I could do that here in this little tree control. And then sometimes I might have labels like this that are sitting in segments that are small, and I want to pull them out. I can just drag them like this, and they'll be here. And then I can sort of organize them the way I want to in this white space. So very easy to sort of simplify your chart using other series, using data scale, and using annotated labels where necessary. So I took 500 odd Instagram locations and made a simple chart out of them without having to do any heavy Excel lifting to get my data to look the way I wanted it to look. So a couple more things I wanted to show you, a couple more questions I got from our customers. This one I've got a couple of times in the last month or so, and it's really a question of adding another dimension to a marimekko chart. So here I want to segment. I want to have products and customer segments, but I also want to have subsegments. So I want to add a third dimension, or I want to subcategorize my customer segments all in this one chart. So my typical answer to that is let's try to use color. If you want to add another dimension to a chart, color is often the way to do that. So I'm going to show you a chart from the chart gallery. If you don't know about the chart gallery, I would encourage you to take a look at it. You can get to it by clicking on Mekko Graphics Charts, in the gallery section, clicking on View. We preload the gallery with about 250 charts. You can see them all here, and these are totally searchable. They are searchable by chart type, by keyword within the chart or the slide, or by tag of the chart and the slide. So if I know I'm looking for a chart on the auto industry, I type auto industry. I want this auto industry market map. I just say insert chart, and it's going to put that auto industry market map right on my slide, and I'll be able to edit it. What I wanted to show you in this auto industry market map is that I'm using colors as a dimension in the chart. I'm using it in a relatively simple way here by using by coloring each manufacturer, and then using shades to indicate region. So you could see all the Chrysler, these 3 Jeeps are all this light gray, even though they're different models. All the Hondas are this kind of mid-green. All the Fords or this darker brown. So I can use the colors that way. And then I even grouped so all of my Japanese manufacturers are shades of green, US manufacturers shades of brown, and Korean manufacturers shades of blue, shades of blue. You can even be more clever if you want in a chart like this, and in terms of sub segmentation. And if you've got items next to each other, you can make them look a little better by changing the lines between some of those items from solid to dashed. So I'm going to do that just to show you how to do that. So first I'm going to change my segment borders, which are now white, to black. And you do that in format chart style, segment borders, black. But if I wanted to say make the lower border for Jeep dashed instead of solid, I can come here to format chart. I can right click on this and say format style, and it's going to bring up the style of that Jeep Wrangler segment. I can go to borders and say I just want the bottom border to be dashed. Yes. So if you do that, and I did the same, say for Jeep Cherokee, a dashed bottom border. Now you can see, now I can sort of group all of my Jeeps as sort of subsegments of this bigger Jeep segment. So another way to sort of add an extra dimension or an extra categorization along with color is to use the dashed borders instead of the solid borders. So a couple tricks to add an extra dimension. I'd be very cautious in general about adding extra dimensions to my chart, only because it's not optimal. It can be confusing. You might want to look at it as two separate marimekko charts. There are a bunch of different options, but if you really want to add an extra dimension or an extra categorization, I would look at color as the way to do that. A couple of other questions I'm getting often. One is, I want to change the percent calculation in my marimekko chart. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to show you how to do that in a chart I made related to the stimulus bill that just happened in the United States, where we're giving a bunch of money to a bunch of different, which we're basically spending $2 trillion to help the economy get going, and I wanted to group that. But I wanted my percentages here, this 15% for cash payments, to be the percent of the total, not the percent of the bar. The default in a marimekko chart is to make these segment percentages, this cash payments, be the percent of all the payments to individuals. So that would make this probably around 40%, and that around 40%, but the percent of the overall total, it is just 15%. So to set the percent as percent of the overall total, you would just go to format chart, and then in the calculated percentage in the values tab, instead of bar totals, which again would be this, I would set it to grand total, and now it's the percent of the grand total. If I want to show the percentages of the percent of each bar of the grand total, I can add that here in format chart general, along with bar total values. I can show bar total percentages. I can also right click on one of my bar totals, go to the number, and say show calculated percentage. By default, it's going to be shown as a percentage in brackets. You can get rid of the brackets if you want. and obviously change the number format. So just a nice way to get at percent of total. Couple of other small things. I know I'm getting close to the end of my time, and I want to leave you some time to ask me questions, new questions. One of the other questions we often get is how do I show a total in a bar mekko chart? So sometimes the total that Mekko Graphics calculates, the grand total, which will appear often in this upper right-hand corner, is not the relevant total. Oftentimes the relevant total is the total of the widths of the bars, which is the case here because it's luxury good market segment growth. So the heights are going to be the growth in the segments and the widths are going to be the market size. If I show those widths as a data row at the bottom, it's very easy to add a total to that data row. So this is one of those nice little features of Mekko Graphics that's maybe sort of kind of a little hidden. But if I went to my data row here, market size, and I said auto total, I'm getting a total here. It's going to be bold, and it's going to show up over here on the right-hand side of my data row. And if I don't want it bold, I can obviously undo the bold, but you get it right. You get it right here. If you want to add something other than the auto total, you wanted to add a label here with a number, you can do that as well. So just a nice little way to add that total to any data row, but it can be especially relevant in a bar mekko chart. Another question we got from one of our users was they wanted to show how the increase in costs was going to be split. So their data that they sent me looked like this. So there was a total tuition increase of 4.6%, and that's 2% for cost of living, 2.6% for school operations and facilities, and that school operations was going to be split teacher additions, facility improvements, and other operating cost increases. So that's the data they had on this 4.6% cost increase. When they put it into a chart, by default in a stacked bar, it wasn't really useful. Didn't really look good. So my first attempt to make the chart look better was to change it from a stacked bar to 100% stacked bar, which you can do just by going to chart type. You can always change very easily among different chart types in Mekko Graphics just by clicking on this type button. And then maybe I don't need this total tuition row, so I just go to show bar, hide bar, and now I've got two bars. Then I can say, well, I want to show labels in all my bars, and I want those labels to have a value and a calculated percentage. And I want my bar total to also be a percentage with a couple decimal places and a percent sign. And maybe I don't want those percent signs here. Oops. Maybe I don't want those brackets here like this. And maybe I don't need this label. And maybe what I want to do is show that this last bar is an explosion of the top segment of the first bar. So with a couple of very easy changes, now I've got a much more useful chart to show the breakdown of expenses and where they came from. So just hiding a bar, adding some formatting, and adding these little segment links to show explosion makes it very easy to make this chart look a lot better. If I wanted to keep going, I probably would hide my axis, x-axis line, maybe reduce my bar widths like this, and now I've got a pretty good chart, much better than what I could with the initial data. Last thing, very quick, adding outliers to bubble charts. So again, I've got a chart in my chart gallery that I'm going to insert onto this slide. So sometimes bubble charts are often difficult, and oftentimes you've got data that sits at the edge of the bubble, and you don't want it in your chart. You want to show the data, but you want to indicate that it's an outlier. So like this Dubai here, I can just go, let me just move this down. I can just go to series, highlight Dubai, and say make it an outlier. And then you see it brings it down to the axis and it adds that little arrow. I could clearly do the same with Osaka and Tokyo if I wanted. Just go back here. Where's Tokyo? It's an outlier. Where's Osaka? It's an outlier. And then you see it just puts it right at the edge, and it gives you the data where it belongs, and it gives you the little arrow as to where in which direction it's an outlier. So just a nice little feature if you're making bubble charts to be able to shrink your chart and add those bubbles, add those labels, and make them an outlier. So that's it. I'm done in under half an hour. I've answered, I think, a bunch of questions that we've got in the past. I will stick around and allow you to ask me other questions. You can use the chat feature, the questions feature in GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar to ask me questions. Let me see if I can also unmute. I'll unmute all of you. So if you want, you can also just speak up and unmute yourself and then speak up and ask a question as well. Great, well, thank you so much. I will stick around, answer your questions if you have them. Also, just to show you while you're thinking about questions, if you've got a question, there are a couple of ways to do that right from within the software. If it's a bug or an issue with installation or the software itself, we've got this email support button, which you can use, which will send an email to our support team. It will include some diagnostics from your computer, which could be helpful for us in sorting out any issues that you have. If you've got a more charting related question, I would click on this Ask an Expert button under Help, and that'll send an email to our team of charting experts, and we'll be able to answer those questions. You can also get to Ask an Expert through a form on our website, and also on our website you can schedule a 15-minute Ask an Expert session with GoToMeeting, and we can do a screen share, and I can work on me or one of my colleagues can work on answering your questions that way as well. So great. I will take a look. Just pipe in if you've got a specific question. Otherwise, I'll stick around for a couple more minutes, and then and I wanted to thank you all for attending the webinar. So someone asked about adding an axis title, adding chart title to our charts. We do not have a chart title option currently in mekko graphics. You can often add an axis title, either a y-axis title or an x-axis title, and move it to the top of your chart, and it would become a chart title. So if you really need a chart title, what I will often do on a chart is go to Format Axis, because I hardly ever need an x-axis title in a bar chart. So I would go to Format Axes, add an x-axis title, which will end up down here. And then I can drag it, move it to the top, make it bold, make it bigger. And now I've got a chart title. So that's probably the easiest way to get a chart title in most charts. Other questions? Well, if there's nothing else, we will wrap up. Thank you all again for attending the webinar. We will make we recorded the webinar. We will share the recording with the attendees and with people who signed up and weren't able to attend. We will also share this this deck with all of you. And if you've got a question after the webinar, as I said, mekko graphics charts, help, ask an expert. That's probably the easiest way to get it, or go to our website, schedule a 15-minute or 30-minute ask an expert session, and we'll be able to work with you one-on-one and help you with those questions. Well, thank you all. Have a great day, and I'm sure we'll be in touch soon. Bye-bye.